Today is January 20th, 2026, and we will be discussing Trump's interest in acquiring Greenland. And we've been hearing about this initiative for about 2 years now. This idea that Trump has of either purchasing or acquiring Greenland by military force. And on the face of it, at the outset, I want to say that I am against the idea of Trump acquiring or purchasing Greenland. I don't disagree with the rationale that he's presented in defense of acquiring Greenland. I disagree with the idea of him using military force to acquire it. I don't see any benefit to doing that in the long term. And I also don't agree with the idea of purchasing it or paying its citizens in order to become part of the U.S. And we're going to look specifically today at our national security interests and commercial interests in the country. We also want to look at those two interests that we have within the context of Greenland's present political and commercial atmosphere, because the political and commercial atmosphere within Greenland is important in understanding many of the difficulties that are going to be present when we directly get involved in the country. And I say when we directly get involved in the country because this will eventually happen, very likely at the minimum. If the US doesn't outright take over the country, then there will be some kind of agreement signed between Greenland and the US, effectively ceding their sovereignty to the US in all but name only. And so the commercial aspect will be looking primarily at the mining industry, of course, because Trump is certainly interested in the rare earth minerals that are in Greenland. They have some of the biggest deposits in the world. And we'll also be looking at the political aspect, and that would be the governing and regulatory infrastructure needed not only to extract the resources and build the infrastructure to extract the resources, but also to create bases on the more military base installations in the country. We already have one, but creating more, and just having a larger presence in general in the U.S. military presence, because that would feed into more of the national security interests that we have. And so from a national security framework, there is the argument that the Arctic ice caps are beginning to melt. They're saying that by 2050, there's probably going to be very little ice in that entire area of the Arctic. And new emerging shipping routes are through the region are creating economic and geostrategic opportunities for the global powers. And now there is the Northwest and the Northeast Passage. The Northeast Passage goes over Russia, basically. And this would enhance Russia's trade with the European Union. And then there's the Northwest Passage that goes through Canada and touches and over Greenland as well. And so this is the area that Trump is interested in. It's also one of the reasons that Trump has expressed an interest in taking over Canada, because Canada controls the way Canada interprets their sovereignty. They say that their sovereignty extends into the waters. They consider that their own, where the commerce travels or would travel for the Northwest Passage. And so this is why Trump is interested in Canada and also Greenland as well. The Northwest Passage is in view here, and and like we said, it connects East Asia to Western Europe, and the route is 7,000 kilometers shorter than the route that is presently used for this kind of trade through the Panama Canal. So the economic and security advantages are numerous for whoever controls these waters. And I was also going to add that the way that the U.S. interprets the waters above on the northern part of Canada, where much of this trade for the Northwest Passage would be traversing, is that these are international waters. Canada considers it their own waters. The U.S. considers these international waters. And so that's a huge deal as well. And many of these issues will be contested in the future as the ice continues to melt. So Denmark, this is sort of a national security framework of why we're interested. And what's important to realize is Denmark has interfered in mining projects for national security reasons in Greenland. And mining projects specifically that they've interfered with are Chinese mining projects. Chinese investment in general in Greenland has been contested by the Danish government, which holds control over Greenland. And there are growing calls from the natives, the Greenlandic people, for economic independence. And this is important to recognize because with independence, complete independence, the people of Greenland would be able to make a decision on their own to trade or accept Chinese investment. And this contributes to the national security interests that we were discussing, because what the Trump administration and what the US is worried about is that if Greenland is governed by its own people, they may be more susceptible to Chinese investment. And also, you have to recognize that if Trump goes into Greenland in an adversarial way, it may actually turn them to China or draw them even closer to China, right? And that's important because if we recall in a previous video we did on Venezuela, this was the larger problem that ended up making Venezuela pivot to China, Russia, and Iran in the first place were sanctions, this sort of hostile posture that the US had taken towards Venezuela. So this is probably going to continue to be an obstacle, especially, and we're talking about the problem that the administration has of the Greenlandic people wanting to be a sovereign people in a sovereign country. And as we said, if we use force to go in there, that could even heighten the sense of nationalism that the people of Greenland feel, making it more difficult for us to do business with them and invest. It'll create a political environment that would be very difficult to manage. Probably not in the long term. It could likely be worked out, but it would take more time. And you know the investment opportunities will be minimal if you have that kind of political instability where the people don't want you there. You're not, regulatory red tape that we're going to go through. So, and you have to ask yourself the question: will this resistance from the EU and the natives be bribed away? Will Trump find a way to, buy many of the locals in Greenland off, the government officials off, members of the EU? And that's in a way what I'm thinking from a long-term perspective, how Trump plans on dealing with this if he doesn't use military force. So there's a framework for the national security component of this. And then from a commercial standpoint, it's about rare earths. That's predominantly what we'll be talking about here in the mining industry. And this is also a national security interest, or an overall national security interest. And we have to remember Greenland has two large deposits of rare earth minerals, theoretically, that are at the center of the surge in interest that Trump has had in Greenland. Because Trump, again, is trying to diversify supply chains, because over time, over just the past year, he's seen how China has weaponized their massive rare earth supply chains against the US when Trump started the tariff war with China and all the other countries that he was tariffing. And these two mines that hold, again, theoretically, the largest reserves of rare earth minerals, heavy and light rare earth minerals, are, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, but it's Kvanjfeld and Tanbreez. Now, ore grades are especially important to the economic feasibility of rare earth mining. So higher grade deposits require less material to be mined and are easier to separate and process, equating to lower costs. Now, in these two mines, the grade of rare earths in them are actually on the lower scale. In Tanbreeze, there are 28.2 million metric tons estimated at ore grade 0.38%, and Kvanjfeld is 11 million metric tons estimated at 1.43%. Now, China has a global lead in rare earth mining, as we discussed, and processing, which is a key, the midstream component that the U.S. is attempting to build out right now domestically, right? Separating and processing the rare earths once they're extracted. Now, Greenland's Minister of Business and Mineral Resources warned that while Western partners are preferred, and that's a key there, it's that Greenland does prefer to work with the US and the EU in a partnership more so than as sort of a vassal state. And again, as I said at the beginning, the methods that Trump is using to enhance and strengthen our national security and commercial interests are what I would disagree with, right? Because they want to work with us in a partnership and not necessarily, like I said, be a vassal state. But without an influx in investment in Greenland, they'll have to likely turn to other partners. So if this acquisition goes the way that Trump wants it to go, and the investment dollars aren't there, they'll still have to look for other investors. Now, granted, Washington will probably cut them off from doing that, but this is a very important component of this, is that we are not a communist country, and so private industry does have to make a choice or be incentivized to invest in a country like Greenland. And like we've discussed before, Venezuela. Now, if you consider how China's government and economy is set up, the People's Republic of China, they're a communist country, it's usually, when they're investing in other countries, they're heavily subsidized by the Communist Party in China. And so and they probably don't even have a choice but to do so. Many of the businesses and industries that operate in China are probably forced to go and, open up economic channels into these other countries. And so they're likely, those industries in China are, it's likely more easier for them to gain a foothold in these other countries because they're being subsidized. These projects that they're looking to create in these foreign countries as initiatives in their Belt and Road Initiative is largely and heavily subsidized by the Chinese government. And there's already a rare earth company that's invested in China called Shengyi Resources, and it's the largest shareholder in the Kvanjfeld mine. Now, on the commercial side of this equation, it's important to posit the question of where the investments will come from should the U.S. acquire Greenland. Of course, we need to ask that question in conjunction. And there are so many parallels. I'll be bringing Venezuela up several more times, but that's a parallel between how we're dealing with Venezuela and reorienting their politics, their country all together to the U.S. And it's what we'll be dealing with when it comes to Greenland as well, because we have to figure out who's going to invest and will they feel safe investing there. Now, I'd assume that state-owned Chinese firms are driving investment, as we discussed. And again, the economy isn't structured that way in the U.S. So it would probably be very minimal industry that would be a private industry in the U.S. that would be looking at investing money in Greenland, even if we did acquire it. Trump would likely have to heavily subsidize any investment with taxpayer dollars into Greenland right now because of just how inhospitable it is for many of the things that we want to do there. And we're going to get into some of those goals that we have there, and also many of the roadblocks that are currently in place, and that makes any kind of lucrative, profitable investments by any private firms in the U.S. not even close in sight, not even fathomable right now. And so all these things concern the mining industry, particularly since resource extraction is one of the main drivers of the endeavor. And mining development in Greenland is impeded. These are some of the impediments to mining in Greenland. There's inadequate transport and energy infrastructure, limited port capacity. There's only 16 operational ports. There's only 93 miles of road. Airports in Greenland were built in World War II and can only accommodate small prop planes. Electricity generation capacity pretty low, 54 megawatts. And the capital of Nuuk in China has yet to build a polar Silk Road of geopolitical significance. Their dominant position in rare earth separating and processing offers an advantage in accessing Greenland's resources. And that's one of the benefits if Greenland decides to forge some kind of economic ties in the long term with China. It's that China is still the main processing hub of rare earths. Australia is building up their capacity. Brazil, I believe, is as well. And a couple of other countries, Saudi Arabia. But China would be ideal for Greenland. And this is why Trump is looking at cutting that, wanting to acquire the island altogether so that basically the U.S. would have control over who Greenland decides to do business with altogether. And so we went over the national security aspect of this, behind this urge to acquire Greenland. We went down the commercial aspect and roadblocks in both cases. And now we have to look at the governing or the political infrastructure of Greenland to understand why an outright acquiring of it could even if we acquired it outright, it would still be problematic. Now, this is from some information from Brookings, and it says, quote, the Greenland government has been making progress in preparing for large-scale mining projects. With some success, the government has been cautious in developing regulatory structures and building environmental safeguards, while at the same time trying to create an attractive investment climate. And so it's, again, a graduated process. And the U.S. can engage Greenland through close collaborative coordination with European allies rather than a unilateral approach, which I think, again, makes a lot more sense. Partnerships, more so than hostility, and confrontation makes sense in this case. Because even if you decided to acquire the island outright, you're still going to have to go through all of these hurdles. The hurdles we've just mentioned, and then the hurdles that we're about to discuss in terms of their governance. And it's going to take the same amount of time, whether you acquire the island or not. It's just a matter of do you want to pursue all of the subsequent initiatives with the hostility of their people and their government, or would you rather do it in a way that's collaborative and productive? Now, the risk of coupling with the EU, there are risks, and it includes the regulatory red tape. The big environmentalist push in the EU would prevent a lot of projects from getting off the ground in Greenland, and if not prevent them altogether, it would massively expand the time frame that they would that we'd have to wait for to see some of these projects come to fruition. So you've got the regulatory red tape, like we said, the environmental concerns. And while both Kvanefjeld and Tanbreez are globally significant deposits of rare earths, Tanbreez is only one of two mines out of 147 active mineral licenses in all of Greenland to receive an exploitation license. So one of two mines to have received, and these are the biggest ones, to have received a license to start mining, to explore. And that's again, we're thinking of timelines here and regulatory red tape. You wouldn't see any benefits right now or in the near future. And again, from a strategic standpoint, it does make sense, but to take interest in the mines and all these things, even if it does take a while to straighten out the regulatory side and start exploitation. But it'd be easier to do this if you had a compliant government, not one that's installed or one that's hostile to U.S. intervention. Now in Greenland, there is intense political opposition to mining and these kinds of operations due to environmental and safety concerns. And this has further obstructed the licensing process. And I think I read somewhere that there's the governing party right now in Greenland is actually very much against any kind of large exploitative mining processes that could take place in the future because of the environmental footprint, the negative environmental footprint that the mining will have. Now, to give you some context about the Gavansfeld mine, they've sought an exploitation license since 2019, and they've been repeatedly denied due to concerns about uranium content. And there's about 270,000 tons, making it the 8th largest deposit in the world. Uranium, when you're extracting these natural resources, the uranium component is going to crop up in the resources, contaminating the environment. And so they're looking at, if most of these mining projects are going to involve this kind of uranium exposure, we don't want anything to do with it. And this is one of the reasons that these licenses have been denied or kicked down the road. They continue to deny these applications. And we have to ask the question, does that mean that if we do acquire the country, will the government be reshaped in Greenland? And that could draw in further American resources and energy. And it's very likely that a regime change operation like that wouldn't be the most successful and conducive for private enterprise to invest in from the US or anywhere else for that matter. Now in 2021, the Inuit Atagadagi Party, which we were just talking about, they won parliamentary elections, and Greenland's parliament promptly passed legislation banning exploration and mining of mineral deposits with uranium concentration over 100 parts per million, effectively blocking the development of Gavansfeld rare earth mine, which has uranium concentration of 300 parts per million. And so the ruling party has already banned it. And so, as we just said, it's likely that the U.S. will have to do some kind of regime change to their political system if we were to acquire the island. And this is the kind of involvement and commitment that we would have to make on the back end of the commitment that we've just made to Venezuela. The administration is definitely stretching itself thin with some of these initiatives. And again, while the strategic calculus makes sense, why not just work with them? You know what I mean? Yeah, it would make it easier for us to do, the U.S. do everything that it needs to do in Greenland in terms of security and commercial enterprise and commercial interests, seeing commercial interests fulfilled if we just outright own the island. But there are people there, and that has to be dealt with one way or the other. And I don't think that it's likely that we're going to push all of those people aside and just install a bunch of American puppets within their government. And even if that was the goal, Trump has only got 3 years left, and you're not going to see any of that come to fruition. He'd probably spend the better part of the 3 years just trying to figure out the internal politics of the country and also battling the EU, which has shown great concern over the past couple of days. We're not going to get into the politics with the EU today, but they've shown vocal, loud concern over Trump's language that he's using about acquiring Greenland, up to and including the point of sending a few of these countries sending troops over to Greenland. Now, these aren't troops. These troops don't number. I don't even think they number in the hundreds. So we don't have an exact number, but you can see the roadblocks already cropping up. So it's like finding a way to create complacency with the EU and then the native population in Greenland, and also the political pressure back home. There are a lot of Republicans that aren't on board with outright acquiring the country. So these are all these are all things that will crop up eventually, and some of them already right now. So this could be an issue even if the country is taken unilaterally. So will the Greenlanders play ball? It's likely they won't. So for starters, the U.S. will need to strengthen regulatory clarity by clearly defining and consistently. This is the idea that needs to happen, whether the island is acquired by force or whether we're partnering with them. We would need to strengthen. We need to have regulatory clarity by clearly defining and consistently. This would be by the Greenland government. They would need to clearly define and consistently apply regulatory law, and so they can reduce policy risk and restore investor confidence. You have, and many of the regulations aren't consistent. Many of them are grandfathered. They expire at a certain time, and if there's another majority in their Greenland's parliament, these rules and regulations could change. And so all of that uncertainty would have to be hammered out. This way investors could feel confident in going into the country. This all goes into restructuring Greenland's, not only Greenland's economy if we were to acquire it, but also their political apparatus in a more predictable way for investment. And also building out, again, likely military infrastructure in the country and bases, and so that the U.S. could properly project power in that area, which is, again, part of the national security interest. The U.S. would also have to strengthen community engagement and benefits sharing of the commercial endeavors to insulate projects from shifting political headwinds. In other words, trying to integrate or present the projects like mining projects or U.S. involvement, mining projects, military installations, all of these things, all of these objectives that the U.S. has. This would have to be closely coordinated, not only with the governing structures of Greenland, likely early on the Danes, but also the people, so they could feel like they're getting something out of this investment as well, right? And that's also going to help with the political situation as well. And this, again, could be easier done if you were in a partnership with Greenland, or Greenland was semi-autonomous and we gained a foothold in the country through our economy and through investment gradually, right? Slowly getting the people acclimated to the idea of U.S. involvement in the country. And again, you can't do that if you're just going to take the country. And we also have to consider our own dawning domestic midstream capacity. Even if we were to invest in this acquisition of Greenland, we really need to be focused right now domestically on building out midstream capacity, processing the rare earths when we get them, where we get them. Trump has taken a lot of steps to diversify our supply chains, where we get the raw feedstock of rare earths. We haven't extracted much yet in some of the places where he's made deals, obviously, because some of these places are still at war, like in the Congo, Ukraine. Many of these places where he's made deals, there's still conflict there. But while that's happening, it is important, and it has been happening. We'll get into some of that here in a second, particularly in Texas and these places. The midstream capacities and manufacturing hubs are being built out, but it needs to happen at a more rapid pace, especially if we're thinking about, again, rare earths now from Venezuela and Greenland, and potentially, I would wager that Trump will start talking about Iceland pretty soon. Because if we're talking, again, from a strategic standpoint about shipping choke points, commercial shipping and this kind of thing related to the Northwest Passage, Iceland will also likely feed into the theory that Iceland would feed into a lot of this as well. So this is a little bit more information about the midstream portion of this, but this is from the CSIS. And it says, quote, China accounts for approximately 60% of global rare earth production. It is responsible for 90% of processing as well. And that's a huge amount. And this is why China is able to weaponize the rare earths the way they are, it's because they also control the processing of the raw feedstock. And since 2020, this is one of the better parts of Trump's agenda, um, is that since 2020, the DoD has awarded over $439 million to companies like MP Materials, American companies, MP Materials, Linus USA, and Novion Magnetics for building light rare earth and heavy rare earth separating and processing and permanent magnet manufacturing capabilities. Most of the investment dollars went to Texas. And the Novion Magnetics, they are actually getting a huge investment from a private firm. I forgot. I read it just today, and they're becoming one of the lead in the production processing of magnets. And to give you some context here, Novion was started about 10 years ago, and it was about 2 years ago that they got up to speed with processing and actually producing. And so that kind of gives you an idea of the time frame that it would take to in a lot. There are a lot of different factors that contribute to that time frame, but that gives you an idea of how long it would take to build out these capabilities. I mean, this is in Texas. It's fairly well developed and industrialized, and Greenland has nothing. So you might think maybe it might be double the time to start getting processes like this in place. And this is the midstream part of it, but this is just to give you an idea of just how lengthy this process could be. And it's going on. And so going on here, complementing domestic capabilities with allied capabilities will be critical for secure and resilient supply chains and unlocking critical feedstock, like in Greenland, fast track production, and reducing unwanted dependencies. And so that's one of the reasons, like I said, theoretically, it makes sense for us to take interest in Greenland. And we think particularly about the geographical position of Greenland relative to the U.S. And you can see how much sense it makes for us to take interest in, their rare earth, in who they're working with outside of the U.S. and Europe. And so from a commercial perspective, the necessary investment in Greenland as it stands now, it would just be unproductive. These are some of my notes here. But from a national security perspective, gradual public and private economic investment in Greenland would yield long-term benefits for both the U.S. and Greenland, and even the EU if you care about the EU. And this is, in a way, the strategy that the Chinese use, as we talked about earlier, when they're interested in these countries. See, the issue right now is not so much that China is looking at building military installations in Greenland to contest the Northwest Passage and the U.S.'s interest or Canada's interest in the Northwest Passage. What they're interested in right now is an economic foothold in countries like Greenland, because with economic influence over time, that could help to influence their government. So it happened in a very quiet way. That soft power that Chinese has used in many other countries around the world since they initiated the Belt and Road Initiative, countries like Africa, the global South countries. And I actually think that there's nothing wrong with it. As long as they're not putting, missiles or, again, military hardware in these countries within our hemisphere, I have no issue with China working with other countries and developing an economic foothold in these countries. But I would say that if we want to contest that kind of influence on the global South countries that are in our hemisphere, we should be investing too. Private enterprise needs to go and invest. It can't be just a government ran or an initiative pursued by the government. So, for example, as we saw with Venezuela, it can't just be Donald Trump and the government saying, we're going to invest in this country and we're going to make it rich. We're going to get rich. Private enterprise has to do that. China can do that because, again, they're a communist country, and the Communist Party is likely controlling the firms that are investing in other countries like Venezuela and subsidizing them heavily, if not all the way. Our industry doesn't work like that. And so the strategy should be, in order to contest China, we invest and work with these other countries. And with a country like Greenland, we have a lot more leverage, right? And so that would be a more productive strategy. Gradually, say, for example, building out their energy infrastructure or partnering them with building ports. Simple public works programs that firms could partner with Greenland's population and build out. This way, the U.S. would have a stake in all those projects, and gradually you'd be able to work that influence into the government, and you can make gestures. You would have influence there because of the economic foothold that you've created in the country. That's basically what China's saying. They didn't need to use guns and force and a bunch of rhetoric to do what they were doing. They used their economic leverage, and our country could do the same. Our government could do the same. Private enterprise, if it's profitable, can do the same. And that's kind of the downside. If it's not profitable, they're not going to invest at all, right? So those are just some thoughts there. So it's about creating dependency, right? Creating a relationship through the partnership where, a country like Greenland becomes more and more dependent on the U.S. as we invest more in the country. And that, again, that'll be very difficult to do from a solely governmental perspective. Now, I'd say allowing Greenland to declare its independence would make this process a lot easier. Some form of semi-autonomy, that's basically what they have right now. But if they had their independence, it would be a lot easier. Decouple them from Denmark and that kind of thing. Give them a little bit more freedom of choice. And lastly, what we have here is government support is a crucial enabler in the form of directing. This is related to Greenland's government and their support, which would be very difficult to obtain if you were just to take the country by force or in a hostile way. It's a crucial enabler in the form of direct financing, policy reforms to create an enabling environment, and support for research and development capabilities and other mechanisms. Processing and manufacturing facilities are subject to several permits, taxes, and regulations that can increase the complexity, which there's already plenty of complexity and overall cost of operating in a country like Greenland. And if they have opaque laws and burdensome red tape like we talked about, export restrictions, this could make long-term and investment and large-scale mining that much more difficult. So that ultimately what we've gone over here is the commercial, national security, and political implications and roadblocks that would cripple any chaotic acquisition of Greenland. We went over the reasons that from a national security perspective, that Greenland's important, from a commercial perspective, and from a political perspective. And with all that in mind, as we've said several times, just taking it by force or by bribe in a way in any other way outside of the willingness of the country to associate with the U.S. could be very chaotic, and it would just impede. It would be a direct impediment. How we did it, it would be a direct impediment to any reforms or investment further down the road that could take place. So again, we understand that there is a rationale for us to have an interest, and I would argue more of a commercial interest. I side more on the commercial side of this than the national security side, relative to like China wanting to build a naval base or something in Greenland. China doesn't want to do any of those things, but we have to look at it from, we understand there's a strategic importance to the country, but in order for us to exploit that importance and gain a foothold there, we can't go creating enemies out of them at the outset. Now, a lot of people might think, well, yeah, who cares about them? Well, again, you're kind of kicking the can down the road. You're making the process of benefits, and that's what this should be about. How does it benefit our national security interests? How does it benefit Americans? It won't benefit Americans in the near future if we're having to deal with a government that's hostile, right? And they might say, well, just roll over the government, roll up the government. It's not going to happen that way. It doesn't matter how hardcore you think that Trump might be. It won't happen that way. So as rationale, I get it and I agree with it, but how we do it should be a strategic, long-term partnership. That can be negotiated. I know they don't like negotiating; they like shows of force. But I would say that if this does go any other way, but outside of a negotiation, we're not going to probably see any kind of benefits out of that relationship. It'll be similar to Venezuela. We're probably not going to see any benefits out of that relationship for a very long time, if at all. It's just regular Americans, the business interests that want to go and exploit these countries probably won't see any benefits. The people there certainly won't either. So that's all I have to say. We'll be revisiting this very soon, I'm sure, and we'll just go from there. And if you like the video, like or subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Thanks.